So today's course is Safeguarding Best Practice and Management of Digital ID and Background Checks. The session is going to be recorded, as I've already mentioned. It's basically, we're going to be covering it's not a safeguarding course, certainly not qualified to give a safeguarding course, but it's about the tools within TeamKinetic that can help you, empower you to implement your safeguarding policy and safeguarding procedures. If that's what we're covering today. Okay. So if you need to find help at any stage during this training session, there's always help on the question marks that you see through the system. You can click on. You can also use the help menu at the top. You've probably seen in the admin menu, help and support. There's loads of videos and help guides there available for you. Specifically for this session, it mentions down the bottom here, there is an actual booklet for this session, which will go through, cover all the kind of support materials and the things we're going to talk about during this session, well, most of the things anyway. Yep, and if all else fails and you can't find any decent videos to help you out, then you can always raise a support ticket, or you can have a chat with us, which is also available via the help menu, your main admin help menu, which you're probably all aware of. Okay, things we'll achieve during this masterclass. I'm not going to read all these out, but in general, like I say, we're going to be covering the different tools. Mainly, it's going to be broken down into 3 sections, to be honest with you. The first section is talking about kind of preventative measures, things you can put in place to make sure that safeguarding information is available to your users on the system. And then we're going to go on talk about specifically about background checks. And how to process those background checks and different ways you can do that. And then finally, the final section, we're going to be talking about what happens if a safeguarding issue actually arises. Okay, now I'm starting this session here. I think this would be a good idea just to get you thinking about a particular scenario. This is a scenario. It's not a real scenario, and that's not a real person even, but it's a scenario. But I want you thinking about, when we're talking about all these things, thinking about, if you can't think of a real scenario in your own volunteer program, thinking about this scenario and how would you actually deal with it using the tools that I'm about to mention. So the scenario is this. I've got a girl called Emma who's joined a volunteering opportunity. She loves volunteering at the community centre. She's only young, 17, isn't she? On there, 17 is the age. Her name is Lisa. Constantly belittled her. Her name's Emma. A girl called Lisa constantly belittled her with sarcastic jabs and cruel insults. When Emma spoke up, her concerns were dismissed. And Lisa can be like that sometimes, a staff member said. Feeling humiliated and unheard, Emma began dreading each session. Eventually, her verbal attacks wore her down and she left without looking back. No one asked why, only when another volunteer had reported a similar abuse did the centre review its safeguarding policies, but by then Emma had gone. She wasn't going to come back to do any volunteering. So although this isn't a real scenario, I'm sure it has played out very similar scenarios in the past. But these are the kind of things why we do this safeguarding, obviously, why we put these procedures in place. So I want you to try to think about this. If nothing else, you can't think of a realistic scenario. Think of this scenario when we're talking about each of the tools and how you would deal with this particular scenario using the tools that I'm going to mention. Okay, here's some key questions that come out from my mind. Me not being a safeguarding expert, but these are the instant kind of questions that sprung to mind for me. They're by no means exhaustive. I do highly recommend you go on a safeguarding course if you're dealing with volunteering related to safeguarding. But these are the things that sprung to mind for me. So should she have been on the opportunity in the first place for Lisa? Was adequate safeguarding information in place in terms of, was she aware of the safeguarding policy, etc.? Were preventative measures in place to stop it happening in the first place? When it happened, was there a clear route for the volunteer to raise a concern? And when a concern was raised, or if a concern was raised, was there a process in place for safeguarding issues? Okay, so preventing safeguarding issues, this is the first step. So what things can be put in place to prevent that kind of issue? Okay, so was adequate safeguarding information available to the volunteers and opportunity providers? So I suppose the first question is, who has safeguarding policies in place? So if you put your hand up, if any of you have safeguarding policies in place in your organizations. Kirsty, Karen, Claire. I think it should be most of you. Rachel's, oh, Rachel as well. Yeah. Okay, good. It's good to hear. I did find a good resource. Okay. I did find a good resource listed down the bottom here, which how to construct a safeguarding policy. But by the sound of it, you've all got safeguarding policies in place, which is what I expected, and that's all good news. But how can we make volunteers be able to access this safeguarding policy? What kind of places can we put it that makes it very clear to them and accessible? So one of them is probably in your terms and conditions. Obviously, you can either put it into your terms and conditions as a whole policy, or you can put a link out. More than likely, you put a link out to the safeguarding policy and just mention it in the terms and conditions. Another one is uploading safeguard policies to the resource library. And the final one is links to the registration email and help page. So I'm going to quickly show you, do a quick system demo and show you how you would do those particular things. So you've got a safeguarding policy and you want to put it in places where volunteers can access it. So the first one is your terms and conditions. Okay, so if you go up to your super admin menu and you go down to setup, you've got terms and conditions on the left hand side. So these, you're probably aware of this, these are the terms and conditions that every volunteer and every provider have to agree to in order to register on the system. So there is no volunteer on your system or provider who have not agreed to whatever's in your privacy statement and whatever's in your terms and conditions. It may be empty in your terms and conditions, which means that we have our default TeamKinetic terms and conditions, which are always added in there. So it's perfectly fine if you don't add your own terms and conditions in there. Sometimes people add their own as well, to kind of bolt on to the agreement. But you can put in your terms and conditions down here, you can put links through to your safeguarding policy, or you can even put your safeguarding policy in there if you wanted to. Okay, so that's the first place. And then you know that every volunteer on the system has at least had access to it, because they could click on the terms and conditions and find it. So that's the first place I would consider about putting it. The second place is, this is the main place, I think, if you ask me, is volunteer and provider resources. Okay, so you can add any resource in here, and it could be about anything you think that volunteers or providers would find useful. Okay, and one of those things is your safeguarding policy, obviously. You can add it quite easily. Click on the add resource button on the left hand side here. Okay, so I'm just going to go back. So super admin menu, volunteer and provider resources down the bottom here, bottom of the list. Click on your add resource, choose who the resource is for. It's for volunteers, probably both actually, volunteers and providers it would be. You probably put a link out to the, or you could actually put the file in there for your safeguarding policy is probably what you do. Choose your safeguarding policy, your file here, put your title in. Put your information in there about the safeguarding policy, but you're going to have the file actually listing the whole safeguarding policy in there as well, so you have to put too much in. You can change the thumbnail of this as well. The thumbnail is the little image that the volunteers see. So let me show you from a volunteer's perspective how this all appears. So from the volunteer's perspective, at any stage, they can go down to resources and help, click on there, and look, there it is. They get documents that you've uploaded. We've got one here called a volunteer agreement. There's no image, so it's better if you can put an image like we've got in this health and safety document in the middle here. That's your thumbnail image. That's what it's talking about. And they literally click on the button and that would download the safeguarding policy. But you add the information in here, change the thumbnail, which is the image, like you say. If you don't change it, it doesn't matter. It'll just be blank, but it's better to put an image in there and then click on the add button. Okay. Any questions over that? Good. So we've got T's and C's. We've got add it to your resource library. And the final two places you might want to think about putting it is the new registration help page. Okay, so this is a window that appears after the volunteers have just registered. So it's only for the volunteer side of things, but it's a window that appears directly after the volunteer registers. And within here, it seems like a sensible place to mention our safeguarding policy is available here with a link on it to the resource library. Is probably how you'd do it. You're probably thinking, well, how do I get that link for the resource library? Well, just if you go log in as any volunteer or impersonate any volunteer, and you can just right click on there and just copy that link address. So right click on the download button and copy that link address, and then you can go and put it into here if you want to, your registration help page. Okay, so that's the third place I would consider putting it. Registration email. Oh, and also your registration email as well as the final place, the fourth place. So it's better to hit them at multiple places if you can. So if they decide not to read the T's and C's, which let's be honest is highly likely, then okay, it's still available at a click of a button if they look in the resource library, and it's still there on the registration help page. And also you could mention it as well, just as a final check, and put it in your registration email. So if you go down to customize emails, down to volunteer registration email, click on the edit button there, and you can, same way we copied the link and pasted it into the volunteer help page just a minute ago, you can do exactly the same thing here and put the link in here. Okay. It'll probably at the bottom of the email somewhere. Okay. So there's 4 places there: T's and C's, resource library, your registration help window that appears, and also your registration email. Is anybody not put it in all them 4 places? I'm expecting every one of you to just have a yes to that. I'm guessing not every one of you has thought to put it in all those different places. I mean, Rachel, where's yours available to the volunteers? Is it embedded anywhere at the moment for the volunteers to have access to?
Not yet, because obviously no one's on there yet.
Oh, of course, yeah, Rachel. Sorry, yeah, bad example there.
Yeah.
Has anyone else made their safeguarding policy available within their system currently?
We've got ours in the resource area.
Oh, superb. Okay. So did you understand how to copy that link? Do you think it's a good idea to put it in those other places?
Yeah, definitely. And that's really helpful to know about, that you can just go and copy that link. So I'm guessing it's not like a bespoke link for each volunteer or anything. Just we can go into any volunteer and get that link, and it'll work for anybody.
Yep, yep.
Well, it works
Oh.
if a volunteer is not yet in the system, like, do they have to be in the system to be able to get it, or would that link just work for anybody?
I think that's a very good question. I think it just works for anybody.
Okay.
In all honesty, yeah, I think you're fine. I think it works for anybody. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rolf. I've got the one of the lead technicians happens to be listening today, but I'm pretty sure it works for anybody. So yeah, it's a useful thing, and that's the bit that tricks people. I've noticed when I do training and this, that, and the other, it's to go, all right, well, how do I make it accessible? And the reality is, you've got to upload the file onto the web server. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, people can download it whenever they want. So that's why you add it to the resource library, then you copy because then it's always there on the web server. When you add it to the resource library, it's on our system server. And then you can just copy the link and paste that wherever you want, put it into emails or anything else you think is relevant. Okay. Right. Every time I jump back to this window, it jumps down. You know what? I might just keep it up like this. Can you read it okay from like that? Yeah, I'm guessing you can. Okay. So next is, was the volunteer's ID checked and safeguarding information recorded against them? So the next section, we're going to be talking about confirming volunteer IDs, uploading. Apparently the resource area, they do need to be logged in as a volunteer to access the resource area. So I suppose that's fine then, because most of all them places I mentioned, they're going to be logged in to access, obviously to see the registration help page and the rest of it. So that shouldn't be an issue. So was the volunteer ID checked and safeguarding information recorded against them? So this section we're talking about confirming volunteer IDs. Okay, so uploading the volunteers' IDs and any kind of training information. Maybe they've done a safeguarding course or something like that, and also setting opportunity restrictions doing reference checks. Okay, so locking documents, and ID. Actually, I might just make this a bit bigger here. So locking, documents, and ID. So if you upload any identifying documentation to the volunteer's profile, you can lock it down so the volunteer cannot remove or change the documentation. This approach also works well for safeguarding and training certificates. So obviously, if the volunteer, as you all know, the volunteer can upload any qualifications or documents they want to their profile. Just to let you know what you can do, if you want to, you can actually lock those down, and you can add those qualifications in yourself as well for that volunteer's profile if you want to. By locking it down, it means that the volunteer can't alter it or remove it, which is obviously very useful for things like ID. Also, checking volunteers' ID using QR codes, probably less relevant. Sometimes we see it with event systems. It's just to let you know that if a volunteer, when they log in using the mobile app, they've got an ID button they can click on there, which shows the QR code. There's the image on the left-hand side. Now, if you get anyone on the mobile camera, and they scan that QR code, it will actually look in the system and it will confirm those details. So it's basically making sure what the volunteer is showing you is actually real. It goes back to the system. By scanning it, it goes back to the your system and checks and brings up the most up-to-date information and whether their ID has been checked, etc. Then we talk about the age restrictions that we have. We've got that one there. Well, maybe Emma shouldn't have been on that opportunity. She was only 17 years old. Maybe it should have been restricted to 18. So the thing to keep in mind in here is when you're restricting opportunities, you've got the restriction to be age restriction to get onto the system to register as a volunteer in the first place. Okay, which maybe that's set to 16, for example. Then you've got age restrictions for each opportunity that you create on the system. So you might have an opportunity, as the example talks about here, where you're say you're driving the charity minibus or something like that. Well, and you want, for insurance reasons, they have to be over the age of 21 or 25 or something. So that's perfectly fine. So you might have a minimum age to get on the system of 16, but for that particular opportunity, you need to be 25. And I suppose the question here is having to think about what those age restrictions should be. Who checks those age restrictions? Now, if it's you creating the opportunity, you probably have a good idea of what those age restrictions should be. But what about if you're a volunteer centre and you see an opportunity which you think you disagree with the age restriction on it? So maybe the age restriction is set to 16 and it's something which you think is it should be a higher age limit. Now, I'm not sure whether you should step in there, but it depends on your actual policies. But it's something certainly to think about. Do those checks take place? Does anyone actually check those? Because with the volunteer centres, we have to keep in mind a lot of the people who are creating their opportunities aren't the volunteer centre. Most of them are going to be external organisations. So if they're external organisations and they're creating an opportunity which you disagree with a minimum age requirement on there, should you step in and maybe question that age restriction? Maybe it's certainly something to think about. Does anyone check opportunities for things like that and see whether they're suitable? I can't say I've heard many people talk about it in the past, but I'm going to X out this just to see who's put the hand up. Okay, Claire. Oh, you do. Oh, Claire's on. Managed to get on in him. Oh, you do. Okay. Can you talk, Claire? Are you restricted?
No.
Well, what do you? Can you yeah, tell us how you deal with that then. Give us one of the scenarios of how.
Well, because we don't approve everything has to be checked before it's made live on our system by myself or my colleagues. If there's anything such as it looks as if the age is wrong, i.e., I don't know, it might be something sensitive where somebody needs to be over 18, or sometimes people put gender specific is restricted by gender. So we would always go back to the person that's added that opportunity and just clarify why that is. And ask to amend it if we didn't think it was right before we made it live. So we check everything we check the address, we check the images, we check the text, and everything. But yeah, we do check the restrictions. And if it doesn't look quite right for some reason, we will go back and ask them.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can see both sides of the argument here. I can see the argument saying that to actually step in, even though it's not your opportunity that you're running, it might not even be your organisation. I can see the reason to step in. But I can also see the other side of the argument. People saying, well, it's not down to me. It's down to them to know what age. I don't know enough about their opportunity. Does anyone, to the people who don't do those checks, does anyone not do those checks? That's perfectly fine, as I've explained. I kind of understand why you might not as well. I'm going to pick on someone. Caitlin.
So we do checks every so often, yeah.
Yeah. Do you does anyone find it kind of hard to step in there and because it's not your opportunity? Do you kind of think, well, I could see that side of the argument. I'll leave us down to them to. I don't know enough about this opportunity to make that judgment call or even to question it, so I'm going to leave it down to them. Does anyone take that stance? No. Okay. Surprises me. I know some people I've spoke to in the past take that stance. That's all. Okay. So it's certainly worth having to think about. It's weird, isn't it? Every time I go back to this presentation, it jumps back to the first slide, then jumps forward again. Parental consent is the other one. So if you do have volunteers who are under a certain age, then you can enforce parental consent within the system. So what this means is you can say that anyone over the age of 16 can register on the system, but if they're below the age of 18, for example, then they need to have parental consent. And the way that works is when a volunteer registers, we ask for their date of birth, type in their date of birth. If that date of birth shows, for example, that they're 17, then it will ask them, it says, sorry, we're really jealous, but unfortunately you're too young or something like that. And it asks them for parental, for their parents' email address and name. When they enter in their email address and name, it then sends off an email to the parent, stroke guardian, and they with a link on it saying, please click on this link to confirm that your son or daughter is okay to be part of this volunteer program. So there is just to let you know. So if that's your position and you think yes, but we'd like younger people coming on to do Duke of Edinburgh volunteering or this, that, and the other, then make sure that you're thinking about or considering that parental consent option, and that's available within the super admin menu down to options, and I think it's in registration. I should know this one. Yeah, minimum registration age, volunteer registration verification age. So this is the one where that might be minimum age might be 16, but you want anyone under the age of 18 to have parental consent. The registration tab. Did I hear a hand pop up? Sure, I heard a hand pop up a minute ago.
Yeah, Steve, it was Claire again. Sorry, I've asked about this week because theoretically you could put anyone's email in there if you started using this relatively recently. But I could put. We're not checking if that is a parent or a parent, are we? So although it's built in, it's not. It's only I
was going to mention that. I mean, it's not it's not a watertight solution, as we know, because they could just put in their mate's email address or something like that. But at least it's showing that you're making the effort. You're trying. You've made the effort. There's probably a way around a lot of these things. That if they really wanted to and they really thought about it, but at least it's making the effort. I suppose we're looking at historically when it's happened. Volunteers tend to put in their parents' email addresses into those things. But like you say, yeah, there is a way around it if they wanted to. But at least it's showing an effort to actually get some kind of consent. Okay, so back onto here. Okay, next thing is references. Anyone here using references? Yep, who have we got here? Someone's put their hand up. Okay, Claire and Rachel will be using references. Okay, it's just to let you know that when it comes to references, just jumping back and forward with the slides can do my head in. This thing with the references, we do have a references masterclass. Okay, so keep an eye same way you book this training course. There's one specifically on references. It's a good idea to if someone obviously is dealing on an opportunity where they're going to be dealing with vulnerable people, to have a reference for those opportunities, have a reference on that volunteer. You can create your own reference forms within the system. I mean, I'm not going to go through it in detail now. Like I said, there's a separate course for but you can create your reference forms within the system, and you can say to get onto this opportunity, the volunteer must have this reference, must be completed. It's all done electronically within the system, so there's no paper-based bits of paper going forward and backwards, which is a logistical nightmare for those of you who had to deal with that in the past. And it literally sends off the reference form to a referee, and then they complete it, submit it back. Then it's down to you as administrator to read that reference form and decide whether to approve it or decline it. So references is certainly something you could use. What I do notice, though, when I looked through a few reference forms the other day, is there's not many questions related to safeguarding on there, and that may be for good reason. But the kind of questions you might want to think about including that safeguarding questions, including within those reference forms, are questions like this: do you have any concerns about the person's suitability to work with vulnerable individuals? Can you provide an example of how they demonstrated appropriate boundaries with children, adults at risk? Have you ever observed any behaviour that raised safeguarding concerns? Are you confident this person would report any suspected abuse or neglect promptly? And how would you assess their understanding of safeguarding policies and procedures? And this list isn't exhaustive. Like I say, I'm not a safeguarding expert. These are just some of the things when I've done a bit of research into it, some of the questions that they seem to be saying you would expect to appear on a reference form if it was related to safeguarding or the potential for a safeguarding issue there. Okay, so is anybody, those people using references, do you know if you've got any of those questions in there? I'm guessing not, because I've had a look through and I couldn't see any kind of those related questions. No, I'm guessing that's a no. Okay, so something to think about. So have a look, if you're dealing with references, have a look at those reference forms, ask yourself the question, is it related to safeguarding issues? And maybe I should include some of these types of questions. Okay, so that's preventive measures up to this point. So now we're going to talk about managing your background check. So actually your DBSs, okay, and your PVGs if you're up in Scotland, that's what they call them up there. So we have two ways within TeamKinetic of dealing or processing your background checks. One of them is a manual background check. So that's when you do it all within TeamKinetic. So you use your existing system, your paper-based system of, your DBS application form. The volunteer comes in, you check who they are, they bring their ID in, etc. And then you send off the application form. Eventually, the volunteer will get back the reply from the DBS service, and they'll bring it into you and show it to you, and that'll be their DBS. And then you enter their information in for their DBS information, and then it's stored against them within the system. So that works perfectly fine. You can store any background check information against the volunteer within the TeamKinetic system and just continue to do your background checks the way you've always done them in the past. Okay. Alternatively, we also have a all singing, all dancing digital background check system, which is built into the system, okay, which does everything, but it's all kind of paperless. Okay. And it is really, I've played around with it a bit, it's really good, to be fair, and it's super easy for the volunteers. But I'll show you some screenshots and stuff now, in case you're interested. I'm just curious, who has to deal with background checks here in this call? Put your hand up if you have to deal with background checks. If you get. Right, okay, so there's a few of you. Okay, good. Okay, I'm on Google. Back to the slide. There we go. Okay, so a bit of a system demo here. Recording your manual background check information. So this is when you're not using the all singing, all dancing. You've just got your existing way that you process background checks, but you want to hold the information against the volunteer in the system. You want to record the fact that the person has a background check in there, etc. Okay, so how does that work? Well, at any stage when you're logged into the system, you can go to any volunteer. Dylan Marks. Okay. You can click on the volunteer's name or go to the manage page, which basically opens up the volunteer's profile page. You've seen this 100 times, I'm sure all of you. Okay, that's the name of the volunteer. Here's a side menu all related to the volunteer. Okay. If you click on the profile button, Okay, scroll down. There's a section here called background check, funnily enough. Okay. Now, if this top option here, background check cleared, is set to no, then it's showing you all the application information. So your application form information. Okay, so you might have application, then a number, whatever it is, in there for the application reference. When was the application date? When did you send off the application form? Put in a date for that. Was a necessary ID provided? Yes, it was. It was a driving license, and you can save that information. Brilliant. So that's the point where the volunteer has come in. You've got the application form out. You've entered that information into the system. You've filled it out on the form. You then send off the form. The volunteer then receives that form because it goes back to the volunteer, as we know, and then they bring it in. At the point where they bring in completed the DBS certificate, essentially, you can change the option to yes. Okay. Decide whether it's enhanced or whether it's just a standard background check, and then you can type in the actual DBS number and the DBS information when it expires. Now, as we know, the expiry date is usually down to yourself. There's no set expiry date with background checks. People tend to do 3 years, but it's not set in stone. There's no legal reason to do that. But you can put in the background check when it expires here. So if I pick that there, I change this to 2028, for example. Okay, and I can save that there. So just to go over that, you get the application form out, volunteers sat next to you, you fill out the form, you enter, this is set to no, you enter in the application information. You then send it off. The volunteer receives the completed DBS certificate, brings it into you, you change that to yes, and then you fill out the details from the certificate here. Okay, so that's how you record it manually. Okay. Who can update that information? Okay. So when it comes to updating information, it's basically the administrators or trusted providers. Some of you might be amazed to realize. So admins, you can see and do everything on the system. And as you just saw, I've gone in there and I've updated background check information. If there's any questions over the fact that an admin can update this information. But if you wanted to, if you had a particular provider, usually works within your organization, and you want to allow them to adjust volunteers' background check information, then you can do it if you mark the provider as a trusted provider, i.e. go down to the provider in question. Okay, say it's Community Champions here. Okay, you can mark them as trusted, make trusted here. Okay, and by making them trusted, you're giving them like an extra privileges, basically, not just a normal provider, it's a provider plus, provider on steroids. Okay, extra privileges that they can do. You might say, well, what are those extra privileges, Steve? And I'll tell you, this is your extra privileges. If you go down to options, on the left-hand side here, we can see everything a volunteer does, a provider does. Oh, it's below here, trusted providers. So these options here will allow you to define what extra privileges the trusted provider can do, can have. Okay, including allow trusted providers to update volunteers' background check details. Okay, so they're the only two users on the system, admins and trusted providers, who can update volunteers' information. Is there any questions over that? No? Good. And finally, once they've confirmed that, so we've got entering the background information. Part of entering in the background information, I suppose, is also confirming their ID. Like they've come in, you've got this application form, they would have showed you their passport. So you can confirm their ID within the system. So whenever you go to any volunteer, like Dylan, wasn't it? Go back to that same page where we put the background information into, profile page. Okay. Oh, sorry, not profile page. ID and training docs. Okay. Confirm volunteer identification. So you can confirm their ID. You can also make sure upload their ID to this area here if you want to. So you can click on add and you can select ID, identification, and you can upload and lock it down. So you can upload an image of their passport, you can lock it down, for example, you can choose whether providers can see that information or not. And then once you've done that, you can also confirm their ID. Okay. So any questions over that process? Good. Okay. So next we've got digital background and ID checks. This is the digital side of it. So we've done the manual side of it now. Everyone's hopefully familiar and seen me do it, how to record that information manually against a volunteer's profile, how to mark them down as you've confirmed their ID, and how to lock down any identification that has been uploaded by that volunteer or for that volunteer. So the next is look at the digital side of it. Well, how does that work? So during this section, we're going to talk about why go digital at all, how to get it set up, and the volunteer's experience. Okay, so why would you do digital background checks? Well, it's faster, a lot faster to process is the first thing. Volunteers can upload their own ID, so you don't have to wait for them to come into the office to show you their passport or their driving license. They can upload it themselves. Like I said, the results are very quick. There's no data entry of background checks. All of it's updated automatically from the mobile app. So it's actually clever enough. I'll show you in a minute. It's clever enough to read the ID that they scan and actually enter the information in into the background check kind of recorded details automatically without them typing them out. And it's usually cheaper. It's averages about £15 per check. It depends on how many checks you buy. People tend to buy bulks of checks, but it is usually cheaper. So if you something you're interested in, is anyone considered interested in potentially moving to digital? Put your hands up if it's something you're interested in. It's Michelle. Okay, no worries. Oh, Michelle and Claire. Okay, I'll try and keep it brief then. Okay. Here we go, Google. Back to slide one. Back to our current slide. So how do you set it up? It's very easy to do. You basically just go into this into your system. I'll show you this where this first button is. Go into there. Go to Setup. Go to API and integrations, and then there's all the different things you can link your TeamKinetic system through to, including digital ID background checks. And click on that Get Started button there. This bit here, Get Started button, is the bit the screenshot's taken from here. So you click on Get Started. From there, you'll have an initial phone call. They'll ask you to complete a spreadsheet, which is basically talking about what type of DBS checks you want available. You want to be able to run against your volunteers. It's done. We do it through a service called First Advantage. You've probably heard of them. Some of you may even use First Advantage. They create your account, your First Advantage account. It then gets linked through to your TeamKinetic system. Once that's done, you'll get an email telling you that you're ready to go, and that's it. And then you're ready to go to any volunteers profile page and click on the process background check, and then it will start the ball rolling. It will message the volunteer. Well, I'll show you now exactly how that works. So setting it up is really easy. It's a short part of it. How does it work? Well, the background check is requested. So you go into any volunteer's profile page, click on the start button to start a background check. First Advantage, the service that actually deal with the criminal checks, they get order confirmation. They then send an email to the volunteer telling them to download an app. The volunteer then downloads an app, uploads their details, their ID, and this, that, and the other. The application is submitted, and then basically goes on to being completed, and it updates the information within the TeamKinetic app automatically. So you start a background check, volunteer gets an email telling them to download an app. I think it's email or text message, I can't remember, but to download the app. They download the app on the phone, they scan the documents, fill out any missing information, and then submit it, and then that's it. Very quickly, it'll be updated on your system and tell you whether the person has a DBS. You don't have to wait for them to come in or anything like that. Okay. Any questions over this? People who are considering. Good. So from the volunteer side, what is their experience? Well, like I say, you go on here, you click on the start button. This is what I was just explaining before. So you go onto the volunteer's profile page. You choose the type of DBS you want to run for the volunteer, which is what that spreadsheet is about. It's about what options you want available to yourself, what type of DBSs, what they're going to be doing potentially on the opportunity. Click on the start button there. It sends a text message to the volunteer. The volunteer downloads the app. volunteer it scans their face, then checks it against their ID that they get uploaded to make sure it is the same person. Very clever bit of technology there. It then automatically takes any information off the ID and inserts it in the details and lets the volunteer enter in anything that's missing. And that's it, and it's done. Okay. So any questions over that, digital background checks? Okay.
Is it
Yeah, sure.
possible to get a copy of your slides just with that, setting that process out so you can share that with colleagues? This is really
Yep.
straightforward in terms of like it's from slide 18 to 25, I think it was.
What's the last bit you just said there, sorry?
I think I've made a note, I think it was from slide 18 through to 25.
Oh, right, yeah, the slides, yeah. Copy of
Is that
slides
okay?
for the digital or the manual or both?
Just the digital, please.
Digital, okay. Slides. Yeah, no problem. Okay. Oh, sorry. Now we're going to the next. So expiring checks is the next. Is the next section. So now, depending on whether you use the manual method or the digital method, we've got a load of volunteers in your system with background information, which is recorded against them, okay, including the expiry date of the background check and any other relevant information. So how do you identify any volunteers that have or do not have background checks? Tell you what, I'll show you. So one of the ways is volunteer search page. You actually have a filter on here called background checks, funnily enough, which you can add that filter background check, add it in there. Do you want to see volunteers with a background check? Yes. Or without a background check? It's obviously going to be a lot more. Okay, so that's the easy way to filter out those that have a valid background check or not within a recorded background check or not within the system. You can also do the same for, I think there's ID down here as well, ID verification. If you wanted to filter by ID. So for those who are not aware, there's some really powerful filters in there for lots of things within the system, including background checks and ID checks. But yeah, you can do ID verified and do the same kind of thing there. You also have under reporting, you have a background checks report where you can click on and say, show me volunteers where they're, well, there's 3 sections to it. The first one is if you start processing an application, but it hasn't come back, the volunteer hasn't brought the actual DBS form back to you. So imagine you're sat there, you get the check their ID, blah, 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 you fill out the form manually, you then send it off, but then it's, 4 or 5 weeks has passed and the volunteer hasn't come back with that, with the DBS reply, that gets sent to them, as you know. Then you can search, you can check the applications here, say, why hasn't this application come back to me? Why hasn't the volunteer brought it back to me yet? Also got expiring checks. So these are ones we can choose the time limit here that are about to expire. So every now and again, you might say, okay, which ones are about to expire within the next 3 months? Click on the search button. Then it's going to come up with those volunteers, and then you can obviously process them. Then you've got, worst of all, expired checks. Okay, so these are ones that you definitely need to update if you have a policy of volunteers having background checks. Okay, so that's how you identify your expiring checks. Okay, what setups work best for background checks? It's always a bit of an awkward one, this one, because not all of your setups, your TeamKinetic setups kind of lend themselves to doing background checks. It's often quite hard for obviously if you're like a volunteer center and all the background, all the people who are creating opportunities are other organizations, then more than likely they're the people who are going to be dealing with the background check. So it's not going to be down to you. So there's, it's not something that you have to do basically. So in that kind of setup, it doesn't work very well. It doesn't offer much assistance. That's what this bottom one is here. Okay, but if all of your opportunities are created by your organization, works brilliant. Absolutely, yeah. That's the number one kind of use case for it. Sometimes you have a mix. You can deal with a mix if you want to. You can kind of specify and say, wow, if I'm creating, me as the admin, if I'm creating opportunities, I want to be able to say this opportunity requires a background check, even enforce it. But I don't want any providers, because that's down to them to deal with their background checks. It's not down to me. That's them and their organization and their safeguarding policies to deal with that. So you've got a bit of a mix there. But this kind of tells you which ones it works best for and which ones it's a little bit harder in terms of a use case. Okay, so we talked about the preventive measures, making sure their policies available, all that kind of stuff. We spoke about the actual process in those background checks, those DBSs, the manual side and the digital side. Okay, now we're going to come on to actually dealing with those safeguard issues. What happens? So imagine we talk about Emma and Lisa right back at the start. So when they first heard about that particular issue with Lisa, okay, what could have been done, and how would you actually deal with it? So there's different ways you can pick up on it. So identifying safeguarding issues, you might hear about it word of mouth, obviously. It's one of the number one ways, maybe providers mention it to you. But you may also pick up on something that's some kind of cyberbullying, for example, in the chat rooms. You might pick up on something. So for those of you who don't know much about chat room is, if you switch it on, it's an option in everyone's system. And it allows, it's the only place where a volunteer can actually talk to another volunteer in the system. It's not one-to-one. It's a mini chat room for the opportunity. So any questions or any information that's kind of shared on that chat room is visible to all the volunteers on that opportunity and the provider of that opportunity. And obviously administrators, because you can see and do everything on the system. Okay, so I know sometimes people worry and say, oh, well, I'm not sure about chat room. It's not Twitter. Everyone knows each other usually, and everyone can see what's being written. But there is a potential there, although I've never seen it for bullying. So you think, well, I can't keep an eye on all these chat rooms, Steve. And you're right, it's not an easy thing to do, certainly if you've got a lot of chat rooms which are active. What you can do, though, as an administrator, is when you log into the system, the first screen that appears is this screen here, as you're all aware. And down the bottom here, you've got chat messages since I last logged on. Okay, I did try to get one in here, but I've logged off and logged back on since I did it. So it's disappeared. So when you first log into the system, it might be an idea just have a quick scan down and see what chat messages are going on, and they'll be listed within this box here. Okay, and if you want to, like I said, you're an admin, you can always jump in there and be part of that conversation. Okay. Also feedback. So keep an eye on the feedback. Is there any negative feedback? Now, when volunteers go to log hours for the first time on an opportunity, they're asked to leave feedback. And that's thumbs up or thumbs down, and then a bit of blurb. Thank you I had a great time, made feel really welcome, which is usually what they say. But if you get thumbs down feedback, usually doesn't get shared with, I haven't seen any settings which would actually share it anyway. Nearly all the settings that I've seen on your systems is it just gets, any negative feedback gets emailed directly to the administrators. So if anyone does leave negative feedback, you should receive an email, and obviously you should follow that up then. What is negative about it? Sometimes it's negative feedback about the volunteer. They stood in the corner, they just twiddled with a thumb and played with a phone and didn't really help out. Sometimes it's negative feedback about their experience on the opportunity, so about the actual opportunity themselves. Okay, but it's worth keeping an eye on them, certainly responding to any emails you get of negative feedback. Okay, it's your responsibility to kind of address those as administrator. Okay. Any questions over this, chat rooms and feedback? No. If you want to see the feedback, it's also within the reporting. You've got a feedback report. We can see all the different types of feedback, volunteer feedback. So it's left by the person running the opportunity, by the provider about the volunteer, and then you got this one which is by the volunteer about the opportunity. So you can, at any stage, this is just a training system, so there's a load of nonsense on here. But any stage you can go through there and have a look at what feedback's been put in there. Okay. Okay, next we've got private notes and to-do tasks. Does anyone use the private notes on their system? People misuse private notes. I fail to believe that none of you are using private notes. So when you go into a volunteer's profile, going back to DBS recording, ask volunteers to add their check to update. That's brilliant. Okay. So if you go into a volunteer's profile, you can record information against the volunteer. So maybe you've spoken to a volunteer and thought, this person's a prickly character or something like that, and you want to make other administrators aware of it. You can also choose to make providers aware of it. Now, obviously, you have to be careful what you're saying here, because the Freedom of Information Act, the volunteer can always request any information you have on the volunteer. So be aware of that. But there is a place to put that kind of information if you think it's necessary. So if you go into the system and you search for a particular volunteer, maybe I'm clicking on Dylan here, Dylan Marks, say, oh, Dylan Marks, just registered on the system, but a couple of volunteers have mentioned that they're a bit of a prickly character and maybe we need to keep an eye on them. In which case you can go to the volunteer, you can go down to private notes and files, and you can add any notes in here. Okay. And I can decide whether to share it with providers or not. Personally, prickly character, I wouldn't be sharing that with providers, but maybe there might be some other information which you think could be relevant. I probably wouldn't use the word prickly, actually, if I'm honest with myself. But you can share that information just for administrators, or you can share it also with providers. So that's not every provider on the system. That means if the volunteer joins an opportunity offered by a provider and that provider clicks on their name, they would be able to see any information you've typed in here if you've selected that button. Okay. You can also add files on here as well. So if there's any documentation or files you think are relevant related to safeguarding, you can add them in there. I'm surprised no one uses private notes. I think some of you are being quiet here. Yeah, I was going to say some of you definitely must use private notes. Yeah. So really, if you don't use it, it's a really useful tool for you there.
In the next release, which is coming soon as well, we've added tasks to that section as well. So you can assign tasks to yourself or other admins about that provider or volunteer.
Oh yeah, it's really good. So that's going to be super useful for you. I'm going to play around with it. Super useful for you. So you can say, if there's something you need to remember to do for a volunteer, like I need to, maybe it's do a background check for them. I need to start a ball rolling with a background check. You can put tasks in against that volunteer. Okay. Or maybe I need to check their ID, things like that. Okay, thanks, Rob, for that. Yeah, the next version, you guys want to see it. There's some phenomenal stuff in there. You're going to be really, really pleased about it. Okay, next we've got, what if I have safeguarding issue with a volunteer? So this is the question I get quite a lot in training. It's like, well, what do I actually do? Okay, so I've just heard now that Emma's come in and she said, she's told me actually about it. She hasn't just left. Emma's come in and told me about this particular safeguarding issue with Lisa. So what do I do about that? Well, obviously, I'm not here to tell you exactly how to implement your safeguarding policy, but I'll show you a default way that seems to be the way that people deal with these things using TeamKinetic. You change the status as the first thing. So when you go to any volunteer, they have a status. Okay. There's an active status, which is the normal one that most of your volunteers are on, which means they can log into the system and they can join opportunities and everything's fine. You can change, say if something happened with that Lisa, for example, you can change that status from grant access, which is normal access, to revoke due to safeguarding, which will stop them being able to log in and join any opportunities. So how do you do that? I'm just going to show you that. I know we've got a screenshot here, but I'm aware that it's quite small because of the way I'm having to show it. So if you, sorry, 1 second. Okay, yep. So if you go to any volunteer, you type in the name at the top here, like I've gone, you go to the profile page. On the summary tab at the top shows the basic information. And then we've also got this blue button that says update access status. You click on update the status. You can then change from grant access, which is what most of your volunteers are going to be on, to a number of other options here. Now you might say it's under review is one option, or revoked due to safeguarding or HR reasons. Both of those will do the same thing. Okay. consequence of choosing either of them is the volunteer won't be able to log in to the system and won't be able to join any opportunities. Okay, they will also be pulled out of the any deletion. Some of you have auto deletion when people don't engage with the system for 2 years, it auto deletes them. If they're marked with these statuses, it will also keep them out of that listing, so they won't be, their details won't be deleted for obvious reasons, because you're doing a safeguarding. There's a safeguarding issue that you're trying to resolve. So once you update their status, now this person's status has been updated, they won't be able to, or refresh this, won't be able to log into the system. You do the investigation, you make a decision at the end of it. Is it relevant? No, I think the person's fine. I think it wasn't anything too serious. Then you can just change the status back to grant access, normal access if you want to. Or if you think, no, it was an issue, they should remain not having access to the system, then just leave it on revoke due to safeguarding HR reasons. Okay, now, so the normal process, when I see people doing it, is they will mark it as under review normally while they're actually doing the investigation. And then when they've made the decision, they're either changing it to revoke due to safeguarding reasons or grant access, depending on whether the person should be allowed to continue using the service or not. Any questions over that? Okay, good. Okay, we're nearing the end now. Data retention. Okay, so I mentioned before about data, there's the ability to kind of auto delete information off the system, and I worded that in such a way it probably scared them to use that. So what I mean by that is you can say, well, people don't, if they haven't logged in for 2 years, they haven't joined any opportunities or anything for 2 years, you haven't interacted with the system for 2 years, then I want to delete them from the system, which is fine. You can do that. But as part of that, you can also say, you know what, anyone who's deleted from the system, not even if it's not an auto delete, even if they delete themselves or I delete them, I want to, for safeguarding reasons, I want to retain some information. So in a year and a half time, when a volunteer comes back and says, actually, there was an issue on that opportunity, I still know who was on that opportunity and I still know their contact information, so I can follow it up. Okay, in which case, that's what this is talking about here. It's about the retention of data within the system. Okay. Now, if you want to auto delete volunteers and or actually what this is talking about is retain certain information about deleted volunteers. So they are two separate things, but retain information about deleted volunteers, then you can do that within your super admin menu. Here, go down to options, go down to opportunities, no, volunteers, it'll be under Steve, volunteers. So auto deletion period, that's the first bit I was talking about, if you want to auto delete them. But really what we're talking about in this part of the course is the retention of data, the holding of data after it's been deleted. Doesn't matter how it was deleted. So you can choose here retention period. So if a volunteer deletes themselves or you delete them or they get auto deleted, how long should any information about that volunteer be held for? That's the retention period. And then you can also specify what data is retained. So is it just the hours only? Is it the basic profile information? Is it everything? Is it what opportunities they're on? So you can make that decision there and enter the relevant number there. Okay. Any questions over that? Okay. Okay. And last but not least, it's got the contact us page if you've got any questions. Okay. So have you got any questions over anything I've covered today? Anything itching that you want to? There's a few people on there. People are often quite shy when there's a few people on these training courses, but feel free to pipe up. I'm sure your question is being asked someone else's head. Okay, yep, we've got somebody up here. Stop sharing. Let's see who it is. Alison. Yep.
Hi there. Yeah, no, I just wanted to come back to the notes, just to say that we do use it an awful lot, because when we do our support profiles, we have to make records of what stage we're at, whether they've been sent the support profile. So anyone who's vulnerable, we invite them in to do a support profile with us, either online or in person. And we have groups in our group on the Kinetic to say that they've been sent the meeting request, and then once we've sent it, then we'll say meeting support profile request has been sent. Then when it's complete, we'll then change it to support profile complete. And as we go along all those stages, each one of us, so that the rest of the team's aware of what stage we're at with that person, the notes are really handy. So we use them a lot, particularly for the support profile stuff, so that we can always go back, see what their vulnerability is, check to see, you know, what they said in their support profile, what sort of volunteering opportunities they are interested in, what things or additional support that we need to put in place, you know, that they might need sort of clear instructions, or they might need a volunteer buddy, or they can't volunteer without somebody being there with them, or a support worker. So it is really handy. I wasn't aware, however, about the providers seeing that information. So
Well,
could you
it's
just
not.
clarify?
It's yeah. So most of the time, it's a thing that's been added relatively recently. So before, private notes have always just been for administrators, but we had a request of some users who say, some of our customers, who basically say that their providers. I know this is not the same for all of you, but their providers all work for their organization. And they say, well, actually, the private notes are not just for the admins, it's also for my providers, because they're sat in the office over there and they're creating opportunities, but they need to know this information. So we have the ability to share it with, share those notes with providers. That's a scenario I've heard about, which I know it's currently being used. But it only gets shared with providers if you click on the checkbox. So let me just confirm to make sure, because it's an important thing.
So as it stands, it's not shared with anybody except for us.
Correct. So
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So if I go to who was it? Dylan, wasn't it? I go to Dylan Marks, that volunteer, and you go down to private notes and files. You see this checkbox here. If that's checked, then it will share it with providers. If it's not checked, which it won't be by default, it's not. You've got to go out your way to click on it.
Okay.
Okay. Then if you check yours, I'm almost certain yours won't be checked.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
No worries.
Stephen, just a question as well, if I can.
Yeah, sure.
So going on to those notes. So if I was to put a note on, I would hit share with the provider, and that would be shared with the opportunity provider. So in my case, the area manager for one of our shops, for example, or the line manager.
Yeah.
If they were, as a provider, can they add in notes regarding a volunteer and then I see them?
Yes, they can. You know, that's a really good question. I'm pretty sure they can. Tell you what, let's take a look now. I should know the answer to that. I think the answer is yes, but I'm just going to double check it now. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take this community champions here. Impersonate. I know they can leave notes. I'm just not sure whether they can share them with the administrator. So I'm logged in as admin hat off, out the door, provider hat on, down to volunteers.
So providers can share notes to admins. They can't share them to other providers. We've just spoken about actually in the chat.
Oh, right. Have you? Oh, yeah. I thought that was the case. So if they click on a volunteer, Chris Mine, you'll probably all know Chris. Click on a volunteer here. Wait there. Wrong one. Sorry. Click on the volunteer. Let's go for Kristen one. There we go. Okay, so I'm logged in as a provider. Okay. If I go down to private notes and files, share the note with administrator. So it works exactly the same way as you'd expect, but in reverse. They can decide whether to share it with the admin or not.
Yeah. So any notes relating to that volunteer are all in one place, whether it be myself that adds them, another admin, or the opportunity providers.
Yeah, just keep in mind, like Rolf has mentioned, though, as a provider, if they add a note, the note is visible to them and any administrator. It's not visible to other providers.
Yeah,
okay?
that's right. Okay.
Any note that you create, if you say it's available to providers, then it's visible to all the admins and any providers that, you know, of opportunities that volunteers on, basically. Okay, so it's not, so if you add a note and share it with providers, it could potentially be available to any provider, because the volunteer could join any of their opportunities and be linked to them, and then they'd be able to see the note. The other way around, if the provider adds one here, so me and my provider hat on, they add a note and share it with the administrator, it's just them, not all of the providers, just them
Right.
and the administrator.
Right.
You can see that note.
Right. Okay, thanks. Just so I make sure and use it in the right way, basically. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Another question? Yep, Alice.
Yeah, just quickly. So just to be clear, if that volunteer is on has joined 5 opportunities, it's just those 5 providers from those opportunities, providing it's not something that's been put on by us, that will see those notes.
No, so if you had a volunteer who was on 5 opportunities offered by 5 different providers, and you as the administrator, let's go back to my admin screen, you go to the volunteer and you add a note against the volunteer. Where is it here? Private notes. You add a note against the volunteer. If I added this note now, it's only going to be visible to just administrators. If I clicked on the checkbox and added a note, now it's visible to all administrators and any provider that volunteer is linked to. Those who remember training, number one way they've joined one of their opportunities. So those 5 providers then would be able to see this note. Okay.
Yeah.
If the volunteer joined one of their opportunities, so they were linked to them. Now from the provider side, so get rid of my admin hat, put on my provider hat. If me as one of those 5 providers, I had a note in here. Okay. And I shared it. Well, if I had a note like that, the only person who would see it is me. No admins, no providers would see it. If I clicked on the checkbox before I add the note, then me and the administrators would see it, but not the other providers. Okay, because it's not their place to tell another. It's your place. You can say, I've got a note which I think is relevant to any providers who have to deal with this volunteer. It's not the provider's place, because they could be an external organisation to decide what other organisations should see about that particular volunteer. It's just not their place to do that. So if you got a note and you thought, oh, this is something that all providers should be aware of, you can add it in there as an admin note as well. So all providers can make aware of it. But by default, if one of those 5 providers adds a note in here, no other providers will be able to see that note, only them. And if you click on the checkbox, it's them and administrators. Does that make any clearer?
Yep, that's clear. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So if there's no other questions, then share my screen. I'm here. Thank you for your time, and have a lovely afternoon. Like I say, don't be afraid. You saw all the help tips and information was. If you're interested in more about references, like I say, put yourself on the references class, and have a play around with those features we just spoke about, and see if any of them work for you. Okay, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks, guys.